Did you write that down?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I didn't write that down, but I just read what Brent wrote down. I just liked it. I just liked it there. Hello, everybody. I'm Cody Troyer.
And I'm Brent Gaisford.
And we are the Hugonauts, here to review and discuss with you the best science fiction novels of all time.
This week, Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. So excited to talk about this. Nice short book, 263 pages, 10 hours on audiobook. It won the Hugo Award in 1960. Amazing book.
Such a good book. And don't forget about next time, which is going to be our book club book, as voted on by the Discord, The Sparrow. Join us on there to discuss it, or check out the episode.
For sure. And this week we have a special guest joining us.
Tom is one of our oldest friends, a huge fan of sci-fi, and also an Army captain who is currently deployed overseas. We're really excited to have Tom on to talk about Starship Troopers because we had all these questions that were like, we needed some military background on this one.
Hey, yeah, super excited to be here. I don't know if you remember this, Cody, but when you first started, you and Brent first started on this, you asked me in your kitchen one time, have I ever read Starship Troopers? And I looked at you like you were crazy. Like, yeah, man, of course. Like a lot of people in the Army read it, and I like sci-fi. So, yeah, super excited to be on and talking about it.
Hell yes. All right. Well, Brent, what happens?
The book is set in the future. You'll be surprised to hear. And it follows a young man as he's graduating from high school and doesn't quite know what he wants to do with his life. And so he decides to enlist for government service. Actually, he's not specifically joining the military, but he enlists in government service, and then the government can make you do whatever they want. And he ends up in the Mobile Infantry. Is that what they call them? I'm seeing nods. Okay, good. It is the Mobile Infantry. They jump out of space in crazy pods and fight. There's a lot of training, and then a war starts. And I think that's about what I'll do in the summary. It's like a super philosophical book, and it's a lot about like military, what it's like to go through this training program. And anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, all right, that's plot summary. And I said too many words.
That was great. Tom, why don't you start with your ranking?
All right. Give it 5 out of 5. Full send. It's a classic. I think probably my favorite of the genre of military sci-fi books.
Sweet.
I gave it a 4 out of 5. I just didn't go quite 5 out of 5. But I was surprised when I reread it to remember it's more of kind of like Heinlein's idealized version of a military more than anything. It's so focused on that. But as always, Heinlein's characterization is just so impeccable that anything he writes is great and enjoyable.
For sure. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 also. It makes me think so much. I don't know how much of what Heinlein puts in his books he actually like believes or agrees with, but it's incredibly thought-provoking. A lot of it is like not stuff that I like, but like, man, it's really interesting to think about. And there's a whole bunch of things in here that I think are just like very true, and we conveniently forget them in a lot of society. Anyway, it just made me think so much. And the second half of the book is pretty exciting. The first half is less plot driven, but like really philosophically gripping. So anyway, yeah, I love this one. 5 out of 5 for sure.
Well, let's talk about one of your things first. It does take a second to get going, right? It's a lot of training. It almost feels like the Full Metal Jacket, where it's like training and then combat. Like it's two different things, but it's a little more seamless.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Heinlein definitely knew that because he has the opening like scene and chapter, which I'll remember for the rest of my life. It's like a super, it's a great hook. But the opening chapter is like a flash forward to after training is over and he's like deployed and in combat, because I think Heinlein was probably, I need some way to make the first half of this book more exciting. And so the answer was like, just put part of the second half in the first half.
A little bit of an in media res kind of action.
Yeah.
It does kind of linger on like the his home and like his high school class, but a lot of the crux of the book is really showing that civil military divide. And I don't think they could really edit out really showing, Johnny as a civilian, like his background, his home life, society life. I don't think you can really edit that down. I think the book is pretty lean for like covering. It doesn't really linger where it doesn't need to, but I think that stuff is actually, upon a rereading, like pretty important to capture.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I guess it was. I guess it's more like it's surprising. You
Yeah.
think that it's gonna get back into the action after that opening scene, and then there's a lot of setup, but the setup's enjoyable too. And I think I agree, it's totally necessary. Um, the largest burning question I had, which is why I initially reached out to you, Tom, and then we invited you on, is when I was reading it, I was like, okay, that Heinlein clearly just wants to talk about military structure, the training, the command structure, the way they get on ships, all this stuff. And I was wondering if it's from his own experience, if it's the actual structure of what the U.S. military was like. Heinlein served in the Navy in the 30s, during the 30s, and he's just putting that in the future, or if he is idealizing the military as part of his speculative fiction. Is like the part of the science fiction is what should the military look like, and what does the military look like in this future world?
Well, yeah, and it's kind of a difficult question to answer exactly. And I really spent a lot of time thinking about it. Well, one, it's undoubtedly very idealized a lot of parts. And if you pop someone out of, an army unit in, I mean, even World War One, and you brought them to a modern unit, I mean, there would be a lot that would be shocking. But then there's a lot of things that would also still be familiar. It's not like we just started from scratch. The thing based on when he wrote the book, there's a lot that feels very familiar, much more so than it should. There's a lot of things he got right. Part of that is technology. Part of that is the all volunteer force.
Are those things that he got right that are current, but he weren't existing back then? Is that what you're saying? Like they're prescient?
Correct. That there's things that are obviously very different, and they're fighting bugs on an alien world. But the manner in which they're kind of presented feels a lot closer to today, in today's experience, than just within the internal rank structure and the overall like just professionalism that probably wasn't as much the case back in his day. But so hopefully that kind of gets at what you're asking.
Yeah, it just like I was just so curious whether it was even a sci-fi book. It was like just bugs and combat in space with the 1930s military, or if it was him saying, I want to show what I think the military could be like and should be like in the future, or might be like, even if there's no intent there for it to be like that.
Yeah.
For him, because he's clearly doing that with the world.
Yeah, it captures a lot of the existing rank structure that he was familiar with in roles and responsibilities. But even that is kind of captured in a very vision-heavy manner. That I think that part of it has aged quite well.
Okay.
Yeah, we should throw out there. So Heinlein was in the military in the 30s, though, right before World War II. But he wrote this book after World War II and Korea. So I think it was based on his military experience to some extent, but I think also really shaped by the fact that like the United States had just been engaged in like two horrible but like good, very like quite clearly like good wars. So it feels like worth calling that out in contrast to like other military sci-fi written at other times.
Yeah, let's just go into it. There's a huge divide. There's Forever War, Joe Haldeman, based on his experience in Vietnam, and Starship Troopers are like the two big military sci-fi classics, I feel like, and they differ in their tones.
They differ radically in the tones. And looking at the histories of the authors, like that totally snaps it into focus. Heinlein had a multi-year process. He wanted to go to the Naval Academy. Spent years and ultimately, got an appointment, commissioned, volunteered. In the interwar period, the military was very it was all volunteer, but it was extremely professionally oriented. there's just this underlying opinion and attitude towards the military and duty versus Forever War. Bill Haldeman, like being drafted, I think it's particularly interesting that he entered as a soldier, junior enlisted, with a college degree. And I think a lot of how he paints the military and fundamentally what they're doing as soldiers is very different in the book, in the two books. But I think a lot of that just, like I said, snaps into focus when you look at the personal context of the authors and how they experience the military.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think also just the character of the two wars. Like Brent, you were saying about World War II, it's like kind of a clear-cut moral issue, whereas Vietnam is not. And so there's
another difference too that I feel like, I mean, yes, that's true, and in hindsight that matters like quite a lot, but also the other big difference between those wars, and that I think what Heinlein did in Starship Troopers that made me think a lot, because it's just been a long time since our country has been in the place that Johnny and I guess we'll say Earth was in Starship Troopers, which is like, regardless of how you personally feel about war or violence, like if you are attacked, it's sort of like not optional. War doesn't take two. War is not a dance. I very much am like a peaceful person and don't think we should, like, you know, I think moving toward a world with less war is a really good thing. But also, like, I don't know, Heinlein just like really put it in clear perspective. Like, if violence comes to you, then like that's it. You're in it, and like there are, you know, you can respond to that or not. But if you don't respond, then you have to respond.
Then you get
I don't know.
beaten.
It's just
You respond or die, or respond or are defeated. Those are the options.
Can I ask you something, Thomas, about so part of what Starship Troopers has been making me think about a lot is this idea of like duty and service, and the fact that, like, you know, society can't function without people like taking responsibility and like taking on you know, that service, but most people don't do it. And anyway, I think that's like very astute and true. And there's like lots of ways you can see that in our society. But what it's made me wonder is like, how do people in the military think about civilians? Like their attitude toward the civilian population in the Forever War is like, in Starship Troopers is pretty interesting. So yeah, I was just curious to hear like what you thought of that.
And this is getting into a little speculative, and I just want to reaffirm that, you know, this is just me as Cody and Brent's friend, and, you know, sci-fi appreciator.
Yeah.
What people think about civilians, that's it's kind of hard to capture in, I would say that's a pretty wide gamut. It's not like a distrust or codified opinion that I could really like kind of express that and be like, oh wow, that's how they really feel about civilians.
That makes total sense. I guess what I'm really wondering is like, do you feel, does that idea of like duty and service, does that like resonate with people in the military a lot? Is like, do people think about serving in the military in the way that the people in this book sort of do? I
think so. I think it's an interesting thing for people to kind of approach, and the way they have it in the book is a little different, of really stacking it up, kind of like the intake process. I think the whole intake and training pipeline, I think, is really interesting for people to, in the military, to read and to follow along with. You know, zero consequences for walking away, just imposing a personal cost. And it's a little like people talk about the significance of returning grocery store carts. It's like a way to kind of measure, you know, society, because there's really no benefit of doing that.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, you can kind of categorize people who do it and don't, but what if you start imposing personal cost, imposing risk, physical discomfort, and then stacking it so that there's kind of no upside. It's an interesting thing to play with and to kind of consider. But again, you know, it's a very idealized version that he's kind of presenting. I'm sure a lot of cynical military people would say, you know, interesting theory for determining who can vote in a society. How many of those people, are just their future version of 18-year-olds who are just want to get their future version of a Camaro. They make the point of that in this kind of their political system, the segment that earns the right to vote are not gifted with higher talent or higher intellect or higher, it's this duty separation. I don't know, interesting concept for sure. I think it sparks debate.
Yeah, hold on. Let's clarify this. So this is one of the really interesting, like, controversial things in this book. So part of the reason that he joins is that the only way to be able to vote in this society is to do this, like, 2 years of government service, which may or may not be in the military. And I think this is part of why, like, well, it's mostly because of the movie and then maybe now the game, but people like say that Starship Troopers is fascist. And I think it's because of this thing where, like, not everyone gets to vote, and it's sort of, but it's not fascism. I don't really know what to call it. It's also not a military junta, because while you're in your government service, you don't get to vote. It's only after you retire. So it's just I don't know. It's a weird thing that doesn't exist anywhere on Earth, but it's definitely it's not a democracy. It's something else.
But the military in the book seems profoundly uninterested in politics, to be honest. Like, both Johnny and all of his compatriots and the entire structure does not seem, and I'd go even further that it seems like that would be strongly internally frowned upon to be doing it just for the right to vote, or for some kind of, like, access to being a politician.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's a good point, because it really is just about, they just want to do it to serve.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly though, they also call voting a responsibility, not a right. They're like, well, this is a thing that, like, this is like the next responsibility that we have after you're done here. That's like the next thing. And I think that was an interesting point that he was making as well about, like, we view in our society, I think there's a lot of, sometimes it feels like people don't take voting very seriously. And that was something I actually liked in the book with its strange, there's some strange overtones, but, like, I don't know, it is a responsibility and we should take it seriously. I think he's right to point out that, like, some people don't.
And there's a lot of other interesting philosophical points in this book too. Like, what did you guys think about the corporal punishment thing, that diatribe that Dubois, his high school teacher Dubois, has?
Oh yeah, this one's clearly bad. Yeah, so he goes on this diatribe where he's basically like, the reason the democracies failed is because they weren't really punishing criminals. They just sent criminals to jail, and, like, the jails were nice. So now if you commit crime, we, like, physically whip you and, like, punish you, and that people respond to that, just like, and then he just sort of takes it for granted. He's like, just like small children and animals only learn things if you beat them. And it's like, oh God, okay. There's some tough things about this society.
Yeah, they seem to have kind of a bimodal punishment system. It's either beating or hanging. They're like, yeah, we'll beat you at a certain point. They just hang you, and it's like, well, that's our two solutions to imposing punishment.
Yeah, it's very old school for science fiction, for, of humanity's past, and I think it's to your point, Brent, interesting to wonder if Heinlein is, like, mocking some of these ideas, or if he loves some of these ideas, or if he's just come up with ideas and he's like, well, society could do this. What would that look like?
I think there's no way he believes all his books have crazy stuff in them.
Right,
mostly.
exactly.
Like, there's no way he believes all these crazy things. He probably does believe some of them. I don't know. He's passed now, so who's to say? But yeah, I hope he doesn't believe that one, or didn't believe that one. I guess it's tough.
The last one I had written down, which I was curious of thoughts on. I really liked Dubois again. Rico, the main character's teacher, his discussion on morality as that survival is our only moral imperative, and that duty is survival in a social context. That, like, we don't have natural rights. We only develop social rights because they help us survive. And I found that point really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think that's one of the stronger lines. There's
Yeah, I
something
agree.
kind of succinct, getting to that self-preservation, like is to self as like duty is to society or something like that. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
definitely a great line.
It's not something we think about in such bare terms often. So it's interesting to read it in such a succinct way and be like, well, yeah, I mean, you're right.
Yeah. He also had, Dubois had another interesting, there's one more Dubois that I really liked, which was about what defines the value of something. And he's making an argument about like, it's not the work that goes into something that defines the value. It's like how much people want it. And he sort of professes that this is a self-evident fact because like if you give someone who doesn't know how to bake like some apples and some flour and then they like work on it for 2 hours and you give like an extremely skilled baker those things for 2 hours, like people don't value the output the same way. People like the one that like tastes delicious and the person who knows what they're doing made. And so like the idea that like just because you tried hard, like you deserve the same results as ever anyone else who tried hard. And he's kind of like, nah, you you don't. Did you make a good thing that people like, or did you not? And I think that's like, it was just like, oh yeah, well that's yep, that's definitely true. Nobody's gonna argue with that, but we don't. Anyway, it's just like an interesting little thought experiment, and I think that was like Heinlein's little like anti-communist thing during the Cold War. But anyway,
His little jab.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's kind of an interesting thing. They don't really directly address the whole communism thing, but it's definitely part of the context he wrote the book, and really stressing because there's a lot of stated goals of this society, this organization of the motivations of the motivations of society, kind of the stated goals of what communism was trying to achieve, and really making a sharp point that you cannot. It's not something that can ever be mandated or forced out of somebody. It's only kind of through self-selection, and they almost make kind of a theater of it. Of really, you sure you want to do this? Like, oh, it'd just be too easy to walk away. It'd be, ooh, this is a really tough road ahead. They kind
Yeah,
of,
well, like let you go home to see your high school girlfriend for one more weekend, and then when you come back, we make you pick again.
it's like, yeah, do you know what would happen if you didn't show up? Nothing. You just gotta go back to life. So I think it's kind of it.
Yeah. What else did you find interesting about this book?
As far as other things, yeah, I think mentioned that they do kind of spend some time with the pipeline of his kind of basic training in that process of becoming. I think that's an interesting thing for people to follow along. User experiences vary with that process, but there is growth happening, and then they capture in the book of a leave period of just being like, oh wow, this is different, that's different. I think that can be somewhat relatable. It's very kind of different in the book, but also, how so all the leadership is very idealized, except maybe vague speculation about generals and sky marshals. But I'd say that's pretty idealized. Everyone's amazing at their job, but my relationship with the book changes as I go through the years of seeing this perceived gulf between leadership, like where my leaders are, where I am, and how that doesn't seem like there's any kind of bridge, and then eventually kind of getting to that level. It's kind of funny. We laugh now when small children refer to the big kids, referring to third graders, but in their mind, they're the big kids, and it's kind of strange to have adult memories where you have thoughts like that who the big kids are, and then kind of like that perspective changes.
Yeah.
Now I'm at the point where I have, I'm in a position to mentor junior officers. And so there's some of the conversations. There's one conversation, very different conversation, very not like Hollywood narrative, entertaining book, but it was a very similar conversation to one of his mentorship sessions with a company commander, that I had a very different take on this read. So
yeah, so it sounds like there's a big reason why people in the military love it so much, and why it's appealing to the broader population as well. Is if you get something right, you get a window in if you're outside, or you you have things to latch onto directly if you have that experience. And if you, I don't know, just capturing the human condition like Heinlein is great at, then you're going to come up with good stuff that lasts. But a couple
He's also got great word choice. Can I throw out my word of the
Yeah, well, I was
going to
say we have some silly things that we gotta do. How about word of the day, Brent?
Yeah, for sure. He used the word poltroon. Sorry, I got to say it with a straight face. Poltroon. It's just a funny word. Poltroon, which means like an utter coward. So it's like the worst kind of coward you can be, a poltroon. Sweet insult.
It's so solid. I think I texted you about that one while we were reading.
Definitely putting that on the whiteboard.
The other two things are, we gotta, at least in passing mention the movie, obviously. For sure, we really should. The movie is so different. What the hell, man? I rewatched that again the other day for this, and that movie's just terrible. But it's become a cult. I guess it flopped initially, but became a cult classic.
It's just like a different thing.
Yeah, it's a completely different thing, which is why I feel like when you're talking, Brent, about the cultural understanding of Starship Troopers, like the misunderstanding of the fascism, I think it's because the movie directs the audience towards that. It's like, oh, the military, this is fascism, this is what it looks like, and it's supposed to be apparently an anti-fascist message, but the book is just not. They're just not even the same story, really.
There's a little bit of stuff that we'll talk about in the post-spoiler section that's similar in terms of like the literal plot points. But yeah, and I mean, they're fighting bugs. But yeah, you're right. I think I'm done with my list of similarities. Oh, and they gave them the same names. Okay, there's 3 things. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like, to me, that's just like fun. That's just like a fun bug-killing good time. Whereas the book is like deeply philosophical, and also, I guess, a good, fun, bug-killing good time.
Yeah, and about a military structure and the life of a soldier. I don't know.
Thomas, I was surprised that you were like, I don't know if it's not.
Thomas,
you like the movie.
It's its own thing. I mean, it's definitely super campy. You can't deny that, like, the campiness of it. And I don't know, for 90s kind of action movies, I wouldn't call it a bad movie. Definitely find it entertaining,
and it's got it is the level of camp.
Yeah,
if you're after that, they've got the like indoor football game that they start with, and it's classic like 90s movie where it's like 35-year-olds in high school. Yeah,
that's true. So before reading this, I've been playing Helldivers 2 this year, like many other people, and then on rereading this, I was like, oh, wait, I didn't realize like literally every part of that game was just like, it's like they took the movie version and then like turned the fascism farcicalness even up higher. But like, I don't know, in that game, they're like jumping out of space in the pods and like fighting the It's just, I didn't realize that Helldivers was just Starship Troopers also until I reread it. Cause like, yeah, anyway, but is.
That's what you wanted to say about it, is you just didn't realize it was copped from that.
No, well, I was like, I guess I had just forgotten exactly what Starship Troopers, how it worked and stuff. But I was like, oh, fighting bugs, that's just like a genre now. But I didn't realize it was like, oh no, but it's not just in the genre. It just is Starship Troopers.
Oh,
and they probably didn't pay any royalties. But yeah.
One thing I didn't look up, but was there power armor before? Did this kind of really introduce that concept, or?
As far as I know, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we always say that, and then a week later I read something else and I'm like, oh, it was older. It's always older. I bet power armor, like every other genre fiction concept, was probably done in Gilgamesh.
Probably.
In fact, maybe Gilgamesh is, the name Gilgamesh is from his armor, is the mesh.
You know what?
Part.
Here's what I'm prepared to say.
That's his power armor.
This is definitely the first like very good book with power armor in it. Because Cody, you and I, and Thomas, you've read a ton of sci-fi too. Like the fact that none of us have heard of even a book that came out before this with power armor in it, like someone probably did write it, but like it didn't make it into the zeitgeist.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's definitely a at least an early adopter, if not the progenitor.
And kind of the highest achievement for power armor writing is to be like on the level. I don't know if anyone like kind of surpasses it. I mean, it presented very well. The suit has limitations, but it does everything it needs to, and very one of the cooler parts of the book that immediately hooked me.
Totally.
For sure. I mean, the power armor in Forever War is also sweet, but for like different reasons. When they're like on training on like the icy planet, and if they fall over and like damage their heat vents. Anyway, I like that.
Bobby in Expanse.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Also,
yeah, that's good power armor too.
Yeah, that's good power armor right there. Okay, should we do some similar books? And then, I don't know, we're not going to do a super long post-spoiler section, but similar books first. Why don't you start, Brent?
For
With
sure.
an obvious...
Be hyper quick, because we've already talked about Forever War so much by Joe Haldeman. Amazing book. Also, he's an amazing guy. We interviewed him on the show. If you haven't read/watched that, please do. We have 2 interviews with him. We also talked to him about Camouflage, which is a Nebula-winning book he wrote. Anyway, great book. Sweet. Military sci-fi. And
I'm going to suggest Columbus Day, which is the first book in the Expeditionary Force series by Craig Allenson. Thanks to Adam for that recommendation. It's kind of pulpy, straight ahead, fun action, military sci-fi adventure all over the solar system, and I'm sure it goes farther than that later in the series. But it's funny. It's got great action. It's just a good, fun book to read. Thomas, what do you got for us to read?
I have the book called The Parafaith War by L.E. Modsit. That was recommended to me by another unit member at one point, and I ended up reading it. We'll say that the cover art is like very, don't judge the book by the cover in this case. I don't know what the publisher was thinking, but
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And
it's really great.
The Audible version is even crazier. But the similar thing, if you like Starship Trooper, a depiction of space combat, kind of seeing a depiction of a society with flaws, or in this case, there's kind of more on the flaw side, but entertaining. I wouldn't put it at the level of Starship Troopers, but if that's your thing, definitely worth looking into.
All right. Sweet. We'll check out The Parafaith War.
The cover art has a guy wearing power armor, but it's like designed to look like he has like sick abs. Yeah, it's a great cover.
Okay. More power armor. More power to you. All right. Post spoilers. Brent, you can give a real quick post spoilers here. Because what happens to the rest of Starship Troops?
Yeah, he gets through training. He gets deployed to fight the bugs and some skinnies for a while. But anyway, the bugs blow up Buenos Aires. You may be familiar with this if you've seen the movie. But yeah, he gets injured a couple times. He goes to the planet Sanctuary. He keeps getting promoted. He ends up becoming an officer. And then his father also enlisted after Earth got hit. And Buenos Aires got destroyed. His mom actually died. And so his dad enlisted. And his dad ends up serving on his ship that he's like a junior officer on.
Eventually. They have like a brief meeting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they get deployed to, there's like the last big battle scene is on a bug planet, and they're trying to capture like one of the thinking bugs that like is the brains behind the hive mind. And his drill instructor from back when he was in boot camp, basically saves the day and captures the brain. Sergeant Zim, sweet name. And that's how it ends. You actually don't know if they win the war. Like the war is not over, but they just they captured a thinking bug for the first time. That's kind of like the climax of the novel and the ending of the plot.
Right, and that's the most surprising thing about rereading it. And finding out what the book's really about. It's about some of these ideas that we've talked about, and it's about going through Heinlein's version of the future military as a soldier, and what that's like. It's not really concerned with the action scenes or the war itself or how it's going. It's more about the process, really.
That said, I think there's a fair amount of the book that is kind of combat and didn't mention it earlier, but I do really do like the way that's presented is very task focused. That he has this task, he has this task, he has this task. Then there's a quick thing that makes him make a decision, and then it's back to task and task and task. And there's kind of just a simmering level of emotionality or kind of visceral reactions kind of going in the background. But yeah, like post, yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot spoiler wise in this book. I did kind of forget that that they had it was a little cheesy at the end with his dad because it's not just serving with his dad. He's a platoon leader, and his dad is the platoon sergeant. You know, the two most prominent leaders of those different roles that kind of you know, we kind of call it a command team in a lot of contexts of the officer and NCO representative. But it did have a little bit of the like, you can be my wingman anytime moment at the end of Top Gun, at the end of the book. But.
Yeah, that's true.
And I agree with you about, I don't, the task stuff. I do think there's a lot of like interesting conflict, and it's a page turner still. It's just, yeah, more on those.
Thomas,
like
did you find that interesting? Because like that's what, in your experience, like
that kind of thing is
in a, you know,
I think it's fair.
Deployment, combat situation is actually like.
I think that it's very fair to the subject matter. You know, his level of nervousness going in and having like, well, I'm just always sick before, or like, and
before a drop. Yeah,
before a drop that, you know, he just has kind of a quirk there. The level of aggression, you know, they talk about getting aggressive. He talks about, you know, being aggressive in moments, but it's not just this like, I don't know, going around killing everything, like blind rage. And even on the ship, you know, they're pretty ordered. And there was like you know, the scuffle he has. I don't know if it's in the book that it happened in a bathroom, or I just imagined it happening like in a bathroom of kind of sorting out something. That it's not these guys just walking around aggressively, like checking each other. It's more very ordered. That part rang pretty true. Like it rang like a valid representation of it.
And one thing that you brought up that I can't see the book the same anymore after you brought it up, it didn't occur to me at all, but you were like, one thing that didn't ring true for you was that there wasn't that much support staff.
Oh, yeah. Like,
like everybody fights. Yeah. That
cooking, cleaning, doing admin work.
And there's kind of precedence for that. Like, you know, famously, like, Rangers are a little like this, that, you know, everyone's a Ranger. The Foreign Legion's like this, you know, everyone's a Legionnaire. And there's, you know, versions of brigade commanders, you know, fighting out of a tank. Like, but there's, you know, they kind of eschew the idea of, it's a valid criticism, but, you know, there really wasn't any kind of planning staff or, you know, to think that staff primaries, a staff has a very important role in a modern military for planning, and the idea that all the staff primaries are just kind of bouncing around fighting their own engagements is kind of insane. Not to mention the doesn't really seem to be a whole lot of mission prep. They just kind of have a vague idea, like, okay, we're just going down here to shake them up a bit. Okay, we have some unit boundaries, go. That part felt a little weird, and yeah, I mentioned there's a kind of an idea of combined arms of soldiers with different tasks doing things in concert in synchronization, which is actually kind of hard to achieve. It's what we spend a lot of time doing. Cody, like from your kind of experience on productions, it's kind of one thing when everyone's in the room, but when you have a lot of people in a lot of different locations, it's kind of hard to organize all that. And in this case, it's pretty much all infantry and dog handlers, which is like the strangest, like weird, you know, specialty to have with infantry. You know, it's like there's a lot. Yeah, I kind of gave the analogy. It's like, you know, an orchestra full of violins, which violins are important for an orchestra, but violins and a couple triangle players. It's like, really, those are the two you went with. I forgot about the engineers, and looking at his history, he has when he was in the National Guard, he was an engineer unit, so it makes sense that he wrote some engineers in there.
Weren't the engineers like psychics though, or was that a different was that a
That-
different thing at the end where the
that
psychic
was-
comes out and is like, "Oh, the bugs, they're here. I know it."
I didn't notice it before, but they refer to those guys showing up as a special mission unit, which is interesting that he calls it that, because now we actually do have that is a thing. They weren't around when Heinlein wrote, so
You're telling me the Men Who Stare at Goats was a documentary?
that's an interesting one between the movie and the book. That's way different too. Just for your awareness, I don't know if you read the book, but yeah, special mission units, the different tasking, like it's not like it is in the book exactly. But there's a couple things you have to wonder, or at least I wonder, of how much of the book influenced real life and naming conventions. And there was some stuff that he just straight lifted from real life and just talked about very, very matter of factly in the book. And it's like, oh no, like he didn't invent that. That's just a thing.
Interesting.
No, so no metaverse, no stuff that was invented because of Starship Troopers, like metaverse and Snow Crash.
The special mission unit, like I wonder
When we invent power armor.
when we invent power armor, the nods, we don't call nods like night vision devices snoopers. Maybe a lost opportunity there.
But you should.
There was precedent for that type of device. Yeah, maybe there was precedent for that kind of device when he wrote it, but nothing like the way he kind of depicts night vision devices is much closer to how it is now than he had any right to be writing about, being just kind of like a thing you have on you and you just kind of decide like, oh, yep, go into those.
And I may cut this out, but I have to say it just in case. Why was all the Golden Age sci-fi people were obsessed with telepathy and just I feel like it was so common in Golden Age sci-fi that that all those authors thought like, oh, we'll get there one day. And now that's so clearly in the fantasy camp. Maybe now that we understand the brain more, it's just interesting to me that telepathy used to be like I mean, it's the future, so we can read each other's minds, buddy.
Maybe I need to read it a little closer, because this time I just kind of skimmed through to brush up for the episode. But did he kind of make the point of like, oh, this like psychic, and then just be like, oh no, this dude just has like really good hearing? Was it something like that?
Yeah, he kind of did. Yeah, he did mention that. Yeah, he basically, Rico didn't know.
He's like, wait a minute, that guy just like hears really well.
It's
like,
right. So I'm okay. Well, then I'm just thinking of Demolished Man then, and others, but I feel like Heinlein's done it. Oh, and other like Stranger in a Strange Land and stuff.
Yeah, very much in that.
Asimov does it too.
What's the deal with that? Someone tell us. In any event, it was wonderful having you on to talk about Starship Troopers, Tom, and getting to see you. And thanks for joining us. Oh yeah, my pleasure. It was great to see y'all and to be part of the conversation.
For sure, man.
Awesome. We'll see all of you next time for The Sparrow.
Bye. Keep reading.